Great. Okay. So there is a couple, yeah. So I guess one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to kind of review a little bit of the concepts concerning delay, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about with regards to that. There are some hidden features to that device which I think are kind of interesting. So with that being said, we can go back to delay. It's all in the OneNote, just in case you need a little refresher. But I guess we'll start from scratch. I've got this sort of like 80s track kind of going on. So it's got some.
I think we need the Zoom audio.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Just make sure I shared my computer audio too. Okay, great. Thank you. Cool. So we're going to talk about reverb today and delay, but you know what we're going to do is we're going to kind of mess around with this track for the sake of incorporating delay, just to kind of hear how some of these effects sound. Just because it's pulled up, and why not? So let's see. So the first thing we got to do is we got to go to audio effects, and we've got to go to delay. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag in a delay. Maybe I'll delay. I've got some placeholder. Well, let's see. What's a good thing to delay? Yeah, maybe I'll delay the synth chords. Why not? Okay, I'm just going to drag a delay onto these chords. And no, actually, you know what? Yeah, that's fine. I'll start out with that. So the first thing, just to kind of recap what we're talking about here, is you set the delay in terms of a time, a delay time, right? If something is delayed, it's got to be delayed by a certain number of milliseconds, or it's got to be delayed by a certain number of beats. So by default, when you have it in Ableton, I believe it syncs up. The delay device displays delay times in terms of beats. So if I drag this delay on here, as I did, right now I've got these delay settings for my left speaker and these delay settings for my right speaker, which means you can have a different delay setting for your left side and your right side. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out how to set it up so you can hear the delay. You can hear the stereo image. It's on my to-do list. But anyway, if we don't have the delay and we just play this little passage right here. Okay. Now with the delay, each time you play this particular anytime anything plays on this track, it gets delayed by 3 milliseconds, and then it gets echoed for a little bit longer than that, which is jurisdicted by this feedback control. So let me turn off the feedback control, and just so you can just hear the initial echo. You're not going to hear repeated echoes, you're just going to hear initial echoes. I could put it on, you know what, I can put these on placeholder vocals. These vocals are very raw, so I'm a little embarrassed to play them right now, but they are there for your educational pleasure. So these are just placeholder lyrics. These lyrics don't make sense, so I apologize in advance. So let me see. So without the echo, right? You hear the echo without the delay. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. Right? So you hear it basically as without the echo. When you add the echo, it starts to get really trippy sounding, right? Trying to figure this out, So basically, with the 3 beat 16th note delay on both channels, that's the effect we get. In fact, let me turn down the reverb so you can kind of hear it a little bit more cleanly. Okay, so I'm going to increase the delay time to be 6 16th note beats. Trying to figure this out, gotta figure this out, now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. So now it's a little bit, the delay, I don't know if you can hear that, but basically the echoes start a little bit later. If I turn this up to the most extreme value, just listen to the lyric and then listen to when you start hearing the round start to happen, where you basically hear it repeat over time. By the way, I'm recording, aren't I? I think I am. Okay, great.
Yeah, you're recording.
Thank you. Okay, so now this is the most extreme beat setting I can choose. So this is 16th note beats of delay, which means it's 4 quarter note beats of delay, which means it's going to take a while before you actually hear the echo. You're going to hear it after 4 metronome ticks. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. Right? So I stopped the playback, but it's still, you still heard the delay after the fact, okay? So at the most small value that we can choose, it's going to sound just kind of, it's not going to sound like a round. Like what I mean by a round is when you sing, row, row, row your boat, row, row. Like you guys start singing row, row, row your boat. Not in real life because it'll sound horrible with all the Zoom delay, but you can imagine that you would start right at that point. So you can kind of simulate the sort of round effect, right? So at a really, really short delay, it has sort of a. This is what they call kind of a slapback echo. At shorter delay times, this is, I don't know if you remember this, but at the end of class, last class, we talked about Elvis and basically how he used, it's on the listening, but basically how he used a very, very short delay time to kind of get this, this sort of slapback. It's like you're in a room and then you hear the echo off the wall and you just hear it once. Or in other words, have you ever been in a place where you shout and then you hear like an echo and you don't hear like multiple echoes, you just hear one echo? That's sort of what this delay setting is, the settings on this delay are simulating. So you just hear like a quick burst of you just hear a quick echo right after you sing, right? Now, I'm going to go back into time mode. So right now it's on sync mode, which means it's syncing to the arrangement beats per minute. But if I go into time mode, I can change the delay time like this by milliseconds. Now, I want to bring something to attention here. I think if I remember correctly, one of the students asked about sort of the repitching effects that you get by adjusting a delay. And I remember I chalked it up to partially the feedback, but that's not a complete story of what's happening. So let me demonstrate what happens. I'm going to turn up the feedback and I'm going to change this delay time. Trying to figure this out, gotta be right, now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. Right? Now I really got a lot to think about for tomorrow. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the delay time. And when you adjust the delay time, when the feedback is up, you have these kind of interesting repitch effects where the pitch changes. This is a really, really fun effect to use and abuse. It's like whenever I'm in a creative slump, all I have to do is do this and I'm like instantly inspired. I'm like, wow, this is so crazy. I'm making music. So I love it. To kind of give you an explanation for why this happens, I don't know if you remember, I guess I'll show you this, okay? When we were talking about frequency and how certain, if you play something faster, it has a higher frequency. If you play something slower, it has a lower frequency. Like slow is low, fast is high, right? To just give you a really, really quick explanation of this, it's basically if you're adjusting the delay time, you're basically causing the audio in the delay network to like squash and stretch. And when the audio is squashed, it's like you're basically playing more of it faster. You're playing the audio faster, which is causing it to be up in pitch. When the audio is stretched, it's causing the audio to play out slower, which is causing it to be lower in pitch. So that's like a quick explanation for why when you're changing this, you're basically in real time, you're stretching and squashing the waveform. It's basically trying to catch up to you. So it's like in the time, it's only changing pitch while you're changing the time, the delay time. Because once it's caught up, like basically the delay is trying to catch up between the old delay time and the new delay time. And while it's transitioning between those two delay times, it's going to stretch and squash the audio, which is why you get those interesting repitch effects. So, for instance, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I can't get enough of that sound. Let's listen to let's listen to King Tubby doing this. So I'm going to go to listening. I'm going to go to King Tubby, King at the Control. This is actually the last iteration of this class I taught, or a similar class that I taught. A student introduced me to this artist, and I'm like so impressed. I love this artist now. He's one of the real OGs of sort of live music production, and he's a very important figure in the dub reggae scene as well. But he was one of the first people to actually use a mixing console as an instrument. So that's how he got all these he would basically adjust the delay time on his mixer or on his audio devices to get these kind of interesting dub delay effects. Okay, so let's actually, I don't think he's doing the repitch thing actually, but he's doing interesting things that are worth listening to. So actually, I just downloaded YouTube Premium. I got the 3-month free trial, so I don't think you'll have to see ads, which is kind of nice. So right there, for instance, that's an example of having the feedback really high, because as you increase the feedback on the delay system, you increase the number of echoes that occur. And as we talked about, the feedback amount just basically tells you each subsequent echo will be that percentage as loud as the previous echo. So King Tubby messed around with this a lot. And so what's interesting, at longer delay times, you get that effect, okay? You get, I'll play that one more time. When you have longer delay times and you have a high feedback, you get this effect. Okay, just to kind of quickly recreate that, because King Tubby actually experiments with shorter delay times as well, but for longer delay times, let's create this effect. Trying to figure this out. Trying to figure this out. Sorry, excuse me while I try and figure this out. Okay, let me lower this delay time, and let me get it to something reasonable. No, 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 no. You see how there's sort of an additive increase in intensity that's sort of reminiscent of this sort of King Tubby. What he's also doing is he's also filtering the delay so that basically each subsequent echo will be filtered. You can can you guys hear how as the sound evolves, you start only hearing more of the high frequencies? Let's listen to that one more time. Right? So in addition to this feedback, where you're basically having many echoes, right? You have many echoes, which is caused by having a high amount of feedback. You hear dot, 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 which is just the spacing of those dot, 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 dot is you control by the spacing by you controlling the delay time, right? So you have to choose a sensible delay time. And then you hear the high frequencies kind of appear later on in the echo. So in order to just get those high frequencies, what this delay has is a filter. So you can basically turn on the filter, and you can basically have it so that the high frequencies only appear on the echoes. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand, now I got a lot to finish with that. You hear how, as it plays, the high frequencies become more and more emphasized. I basically am showing, I'm cutting off the low frequencies, right? I'm just exposing the higher frequencies. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand, now I got a lot to finish with that. By the way, to shut up a delay, you just have to turn the feedback all the way down. Otherwise, it'll play for a long time. Let's try the inverse. Let's just try it where as the echoes repeat, we only hear the low frequencies. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand, now I got a lot to... Okay. Hopefully this is giving you a lot to think about. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. But it's pretty fun. Like I will say, out of all the devices, this is one of the most interesting devices and fun devices to play with, because it's just, if you don't know what you're doing, chances are you'll have fun. If you just adjust if you adjust the delay time, you adjust the feedback time, you're already having fun. But if you want to mess with the filter, you're just going to have even more fun, right? Now this repitch effect. Trying to figure this out. You can actually turn that off. You can turn that off so that as the delay time is changing, that doesn't happen. You could change that by going to fade. If you go to fade, as I change delay time, it'll actually preserve the pitch. It'll just stretch out the timing of it. So let's listen to how that sounds. Trying to figure this out, got it out of hand, now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. So if like you want to change the delay time, but you want to have a different character. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand, now I got a lot to think. So that's a pretty cool technique. Just a different mode to play around with. If you find this to be too much, trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. It's entirely possible you find that to be too much. Don't hold it against you. There are situations where it sounds really cool for certain effects during the piece. Truth be told, you're probably not going to modulate the delay time unless you're trying to get an effect anyway. So I mean, so there is that aspect of it as well. So I mean, it just depends on what degree of effect you're trying to achieve. But like, to give you an idea for some of the cool, see this, it sounds sort of a little strange with vocals, but just to give you I played this a little bit last time, but just to give you a sense for some of these kind of repitched sounds that you can get. Really kind of cool characters of cool things that you can get out of this. Ooh, I've got many Abletons open right now. So anyway, going back to delay, let's see. The thing I guess I want to say now is there is this other mode called jump. I don't recommend using this jump mode because what will end up happening is you'll end up abruptly going from one state to the other, one delay time to the other, causing kind of crackles and pops. Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand, now I got a lot to think. You hear how there's kind of discontinuities, there's a crackle. It's because the computer is instantly jumping to the new delay time and it doesn't have any time to adjust. So there's a discontinuity in the audio as a result. So I don't really recommend jump mode unless you're trying to get like kind of a glitchy kind of texture. To me, it's still like, it's not a very controlled kind of glitchy anyway. So it's like, what, it's not, to me, it's not really that useful, because if I want something glitchy, I probably wouldn't do it through this mechanism. I'd probably do it through other things like beat repeats, which we'll talk about eventually. But anyway, these are tools for you to play with. Delays are really fun. They are, I think, essential to understand before you start talking about reverb, which is why I wanted to kind of tie the bow on this.
Nakul, can I ask a question?
Sure.
With these, the repitching of the delay and the filtering of the delay, would you tend to be automating these, or would you be recording yourself fiddling with them live and then record it?
So that's a great question. So one thing is, when you're doing this live, you can get kind of cool, unpredictable results by doing this live. But if you wanted to record this, you might be in a situation where you want to do multiple. You want to experiment with this. You want to do a take where you experiment with the delay time, and you get a certain gesture, and you might not get the gesture you're seeking the first time, but then you might experiment with the gestures again and again. So for instance, let me record over this. And I believe I actually have to choose an input device. So you actually have to have an input device before you can start recording. So I'm going to start messing around with the delay time. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go to a different mode, like repitch or fade. Oops, not recording. Okay, so I believe if I show the automation, it drew in the automation. So if you press record you can see it that way. So this is probably more fun. Like there's certain things where I prefer drawing in a line and being like that, and I'm like, oh, that's what it. But for something like this, I have no idea. Like, to be honest, I don't really know how it's going to sound. I don't have a good sense for how this mapping maps to these shapes. So there's an aspect of it that's just fun to tactilely to play with tact, the whatever verb tactile, in a tactile manner. That's a fun thing to do. But with that being said, I'd probably want to do multiple takes, because that gesture I might want to try again. Granted, I have to record enable. You want to press the record button, but you don't want to record enable the track, I think, because if you record enable the track and you press record, what will happen is you'll overwrite the audio that's happening. So let me, you know what, this is a good thing to mention really quickly for later. Recording automation. So when you're recording automation, you basically want to turn on the global record button, and you don't want to arm the track for recording necessarily. It depends. If you already have what you've recorded laid down, like if you've already recorded the vocals, for instance, you don't want to arm this track, because if you arm this track, it's actually going to overwrite all of the clips on that particular track. What turning on the global record button does is it allows you to record automation parameters. So you kind of have like, you can record automation parameters and you can overwrite the clip by arming the track, or you could just record the automation parameters by record enabling the track. So it allows you to accommodate for both situations, which is kind of nice, but it's something worth knowing about. So I'll try to add something about that on the OneNote. We'll keep talking about it. But anyway, just to kind of explain this once more, I'm gonna record and enable the global transport. I'm just gonna press record. Okay. So anyway, this may or may not be what I want, but it's here, and I could always record it again later. Oh, there's still feedback. Okay, there we go. All right, so anyway, just something that you could do. It's very fun. This is one of the things that makes Ableton Live so fun, is you can do live changes like this on the fly.
Professor?
Yeah.
What does the button to the right of feedback do?
Okay, that's a great question. What this button does is the freeze button. So, for instance, if I turn on this delay, if I start playing this, whoops, what's going on here? Oh, I actually, okay, so the thing about this button is you have to have some, okay, what you have to do is you have to have audio in the delay. Sorry. Okay, you have to have audio in the delay. This delay time was really long. That's why I was getting surprised. You have to have audio in the delay, and once audio is kind of percolating through the delay, you can freeze the audio so that the audio doesn't change. So for instance, so it's really cool for creating kind of looped textures. Oh man, this makes me want to talk about the resampling mode. I do have slides on this, so maybe this is actually a good opportunity to talk about resampling. Or maybe it isn't. I'll just quickly explain it to you, and I'll explain it again more thoroughly later, okay? So let's say you like what you just heard. You just like that, whatever that was. It's very hard to recreate that, and you just want to record that. I'm gonna point you to OneNote really quickly. And I'm gonna go to recording and editing. And I'm going to talk about this section, recording onto tracks. We've talked about recording audio tracks, and basically there's this whole protocol of choosing the input source. Basically, in your situation, like if you have built-in system audio, which you probably do, you set your audio input device to be built-in whatever on your track itself. This right here, point A, refers to this idea that you're using your audio interface as the input, and then point B, this point right here, refers to the idea that you're using the first channel of your audio interface, right? So that's like a classic way of recording. That's a way of recording external sources. That's why it's external in, because you're basically taking audio from the external world and you're recording it in. I never thought about it that way. It makes total sense now. So external in refers to external audio, right? So let's say you want to record internal audio. Like let's say you like that delayed sound and you want to record it. There's this idea called resampling, which is really cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new track. Command T. And notice how right here I can choose my recording source to be the external audio, right? External stuff coming into my machine. Instead of that, I'm going to go to this drop down and I'm going to click resampling. And what resampling does, resampling, we're actually using another track as the input. Okay, so we're not using an external audio source, we're actually using another track. So in the OneNote example, I'm basically taking, I'm basically resampling the drums track. You can individually resample one track, or if you click resampling, basically that samples everything. That records everything that's going on in your Ableton session. So for example, I mean, I could just have audio recording from the vocals, or I could have audio recording from everything. So I'll start with the vocals, okay? So right now I'm going to record enable this track, and you'll see what happens. Sorry, give me a second. There's a couple of buttons to press. Okay, So what you're going to hear on this track that I just recorded
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got nothing to think about for the moment.
it's basically it just recorded everything from this track. Like everything that all these little changes that I made that are really, really hard to automate. Like there's no way in the world I would have been able to automate that. Like or turn, I don't think you can even, yeah, like I don't think I would be able to turn on the freeze button and just get that particular sound the way I wanted to. I'd have to do this live and then resample it, basically record it, basically record another track. Okay, so in essence, I basically I took this vocal and I froze the delay on it, and then after that, I just recorded what was coming out of this vocal track over here. So to recap, what I did is I created a new track. Just for clarity, I'm going to call it resampling. Now, when you have an audio track, this top button tells you where you're getting the audio you're recording from. If it's set to external in, that means you're getting the audio from the outside world and you're piping it into Ableton, like your microphone, right? Okay. In that situation, you'd have to set which channel on your interface and whatnot, right? But if you're getting audio, if you're recording audio from within Ableton, you basically can choose modes like resampling or any other track. I'm going to choose resampling in this case. And what you're going to hear is every single thing that gets played through Ableton is going to get recorded onto this track. Okay, so let's check it out. I'm going to record enable the resampling track, and then I'm going to record enable the global transport. Okay, so now I'm going to play back just this resample track. So you basically have like a printed version, what some people call printed version of the entire arrangement. So all of these other individual things are all basically just being represented in this tiny little waveform right here. Okay. So this is a really cool thing. I'm going to talk more about this. There's lots of cool creative implications to this. This freeze button reminded me of it, and the reverb button, reverb also has a freeze, so it's kind of cool. So for instance, if I have this, for instance, I might have something that I like that I've frozen, and then I want to just use it and loop it over and over again. Like for instance, what's going on here? Oh, I'm in automation mode, that's why. Okay, I might want to just do something like this. Right, I might want to make like a choppy, glitchy thing out of this. So I'm basically kind of repurposing audio in very cool ways. This is a creative use of sampling. So anyway,
Professor, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I was trying to follow along, and for some reason I couldn't get the metronome to click for 4. This is like basic, but I couldn't get the metronome to click for 4 beats before it started recording. Could you remind us
sure,
really quickly?
Absolutely, it's a great thing to talk about. I don't know if I've explicitly talked about it before, but basically there's this thing called the count-in, which I have here on the OneNote. I'm trying to figure out where I put it just so that, yeah, it's under recording preferences. So basically, if you go to, so what, I think it was Krishan, what he brought up is, but you were talking about you wanted 4 counts before the audio started playing, right?
Exactly.
So in that situation, so why that's useful is you might be playing and you want like some time to prep. If I press record, and notice I have four beats to prepare. Like let's say I'm a pianist and like I want to record. I'm going to go to record warp and the record warp launch, and I'm going to turn off the count in. I'm going to turn off the count in. And now if I press record, oh, it's like I have to play instantaneously. Like there's no time for me to prepare. And it's like I'll just be like, oop, I got it late, right? So I have to, the count-in is very useful because it gives you 4 metronomic, it gives you a certain number of beats to prepare for ahead of time. based on the, it gives you a certain number of measures to prepare for before the recording starts. So what I set it to is 1 bar. And so I went to record warp launch in the preferences, and under count in, I set it to 1 bar. Okay, so record warp launch, count in, set to 1 bar. And basically what that allows me to do is when I go back to Ableton, it gives me an entire measure's worth of time before I actually hear anything recorded. Alex, I think I can hear.
Nakul, is going to the preferences and doing it different from selecting it in the top left where the metronome button and 1 bar count in is?
This is actually totally different.
Okay.
This has to do with the clip mode. This has to do with session view, actually, with how quickly these particular clips get triggered, how often, if you click a button, how quickly one of these buttons gets registered. So this button actually it doesn't have anything to do with that.
I think the drop-down menu on the actual, like turning on the metronome, you can enable and disable counting.
Oh,
Yeah, this
okay.
is what I mean.
I didn't know that. Okay, great.
Also, the like 1 bar thing to the right of it, the only time it affects me when I'm in arrangement view is like when you click to a different part of the track, it like completes the bar before it moves over to the new part of the track in playback. But so I sometimes turn that off.
Right. I could see that. So it completes the bar before you can stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, it has to do with also how the transport starting and stopping lines up with the metronome, I think, and in general. But yeah. So, but we're not going to run into a problem too much with it. Where really this particular drop down more so has implications in session view. But right here, this is a game changer. This is great. I also noticed this enable only while recording. It's fantastic. I had no idea about this drop-down menu. This is really great. Okay, so I guess what I'll do is I'll put this over here as well, and I'll add some explanations at some point. But yes, it's you can do it from here too. This is probably the most straightforward way to do it, to be honest. Now that I know about it, I did know about these sounds. I think I just forgot, amnesia or something. But I'm glad we figured it out. Okay, interesting. Does this mean you can actually set the metronome to play every quarter note? Oh, that's cool. Wow, I didn't know that either. You could actually set the metronome to play more beats if you want. Okay, I was trying to figure it out, but I think I finally did. You basically can set all of these particular beat. You could set how many times the metronome clicks, basically. So right now, when it's set to auto, it clicks every single quarter note beat. But if you set it, you could set it to click more often than that as well. So anyway, Ableton, full of surprises. Okay, I'm going to transition now and talk about reverb. Just to kind of give you an idea for what it sounds like, I want to play some examples. Okay. So for instance, we have grinds, Venus and Fleur. I'm sorry, pardon my French, quite literally. And so this is ethereal dream pop, and you'll hear this kind of effect, reverb, used quite extensively. And I'm quite influenced by the style too, so I use a lot of reverb, kind of indiscriminately. I just like the sound of reverb. course, the one time it actually plays in both places. Okay. What I want you to kind of listen for is the vocals. I was expecting more of them, but do you hear how spacious they sound, right? What reverb does is it sort of simulates different spaces. A reverb in Ableton simulates different spaces so that you can kind of get a more spacious kind of audio sound. Certain spaces have a propensity to sound more spacious, and certain spaces have a propensity to sound less spacious or more dry. There's not much. I guess the only word I can use is reverb. There's not much. Not echo. I have to be careful with my words here, but it's just there's a spaciousness that's afforded by a reverb device. And what's confusing is a reverb can facilitate both a spacious sound and a non-spacious sound. So for instance, just to give you another example of a really spacious sound, this is Led Zeppelin, When the Levee Breaks. And these drums were recorded in the hallway of a 3-story staircase, and that kind of simulates the spaciousness. So you can hear how there's a certain ambience, a room ambience, a hallway ambience, I should say, to this particular drum sound by virtue of the fact that it was recorded in a stairwell. So a reverb can kind of recreate the characteristics of various spaces. There's many different uses of it. There's more listening examples. Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight, is a really classic example. It actually uses a gated reverb, which is something we can talk about eventually. But without further ado, let us actually get into the reverb. So as we were talking about, different spaces have completely different characters. So a cathedral has a different character than a closet, for instance. There's a wide spaciousness associated with a cathedral, whereas a closet kind of sounds dead, right? So a reverb actually incorporates delays in their design, because you're basically taking the original sound and you're layering many, many delays on top of it. And delays are known as reflections, okay? And why they're called reflections is because these delayed copies are actually caused by the fact that when a speaker plays sound, some of the sound gets to your ear immediately, like in the fastest possible path. Like it doesn't bounce off any walls, it just gets to your ears immediately. You hear this sound first. This is the direct sound. Whereas some of the sound actually will bounce off the floors or the walls, and then the sound will hit your ears. And these sounds actually, it's the same sound, it's just delayed. And it's delayed because of the fact that it's been reflected off these different surfaces. So that's why they call them reflections, because they're reflections because it's the same sound, but they've been reflected, and therefore they are delayed. And the result of hearing the composite sound of all the fastest traveling sound, I mean, the sound that gets to your ear first directly, and then the sound that kind of gets to your ears after it's bounced off a couple of walls, going on, the sound that's bounced off even more walls, going on to sound that's bounced off like every single nook and cranny and like a little cabinet before it actually hits your ears. Obviously, those sounds that bounce off all the nooks and crannies before getting to your ears arrives at your ears later than the sound that just comes out of the speakers and the direct sound, that is, right? That just hits your ear in the shortest path possible. So the idea is when you combine all these different delayed copies of the sound, you create this reverberant effect. You're basically simulating this a certain space. If you can kind of physically model the room, and you can kind of account for the different delays, you can kind of theoretically recreate any space that you've ever been in, and just like pretend you're in some space just by being on your computer, even though you're not actually at a cathedral or you're at in a closet. You can actually make it seem as if you're in one of those places. And it all basically has to do with these reflections. And so you can see these reflections over time. You know, the first reflection happens earlier. You hear it earlier, right? As time goes by, you start hearing the later reflections, the reflections that have bounced throughout the room, right? And then this whole thing, the later reflections kind of get closer and closer spaced together. There's more and more of them that occur more closely packed together. And this is what creates this reverberant field. Okay? So Ableton's device, its reverb device, it kind of separates reflections into two categories: the early reflections and the later reflections. Okay, so the early reflections are sort of boxed in yellow, and the later reflections are sort of boxed in red. And they both have important characteristics. So the early reflections, basically, they give us they give us, at least in Ableton's algorithm, it gives us a sense for the character of the room that we're occupying. So like, you know, those first couple of reflections that we hear, just these reflections right here, these reflections kind of give us an impression of the room that we're in, just like the space that we're occupying. And they are actually very important for the system because they're the first reflections in the system. And all of the later reflections actually are affected by these early reflections. That's why they're kind of like the first impulses in the system. They're important. They give you a sense of the room's character, right? So that's what the early reflections kind of, in a nutshell, kind of talk about. Whereas the later reflections create this kind of long reverberant tail, kind of the effect that we associate with reverb. Like when I say, hey, you kind of hear this long tail of beautiful sound that kind of lingers after the fact. And they can be called diffused reflections. The reason they call this a diffusion network is because these later reflections have gotten a chance to diffuse through the space. They've gotten to diffuse into all the different nooks and crannies, and finally, they arrive at your eardrums, right? They arrive later, okay? So I understand that by looking at this algorithm, there's a lot, it's a little intimidating because you're like, what the heck is going on? There's a lot of knobs, and truth be told, you don't need to know how all of these knobs work. There's a certain payoff of knobs that I've asterisked, I think that's how you say it. There's a certain set of knobs that I think are the best bang for your buck. And those are the size knob, and I put asterisks there. The decay time knob and the dry wet controls. But I guess I'll walk you through just really quickly, like take what you can and leave the rest. I'll just walk you through this algorithm just ever so much. So if I have a particular sound, I'm gonna go into Ableton. Obviously I've got a ton of reverb on this track. You could hear the spaciousness of this track probably. I'm gonna turn off the reverb just to give you a sense for how much reverb I put on this track. That's without reverb. Now this is with reverb. Let me turn off this delay. Okay. Now with reverb. It livens it up a lot. Like I abuse reverb because I just like the way it sounds. It's like, it just makes it sound so pretty, and just everything sounds fuller and warmer to my ears. You can overdo it, but in certain genres, it's kind of appropriate to overdo it to some degree, like this genre. But I will say, to kind of, let's talk about the algorithm itself. So what I have here, let me actually create a second copy of this set. 1 second. Okay. Okay, whoops. Okay. All right, so I've got a second version of this track. I'm just going to delete this reverb altogether. And I'm going to go to reverb. And I'm going to slap one down right here. Okay? And what I can do now is I can start with, I'm just going to talk about this pre-delay. And what this pre-delay does is it's the first reflection that comes into the system. I'm going to turn everything else off that I can. The pre-delay is the first reflection. It kind of it basically gives you, yeah, it gives you the first reflection of the track. I think I actually turned off the reverb, so let me turn on the reverb. If I adjust the pre-delay, the first reflection happens after 250 milliseconds. If I have it sooner, it happens right away. The reason why this knob is useful, in a nutshell, is because if you have a really quick pre-delay time, and if, let's say you have vocals that you want to enunciate really clearly, the reverb might get in the way of that. It might actually make your vocals, your enunciation kind of messy. So the advantage to having a higher pre-delay is that you can actually say you could say the consonants or the vowels that you want to say, and then the reverb kind of kicks in after the fact. So that's why you would have this. One of the reasons. Some people actually, I have an explanation on OneNote for how some people actually have a very specific pre-delay time that actually matches the tempo of your song. I won't go into that, but it is on the OneNote under pre-delay. So you can experiment with pre-delay from that standpoint. If you feel like I need a little bit more presence in my vocals, it's getting washed out by this reverb, you can adjust the pre-delay accordingly. You can imagine this as like the first wall that like the sound bounces off of before it's like causing the first delay in the system, right? Moving on, what you see on the input processing section is basically a filter. And the idea is, you're going to see a lot of these, so that's why I was kind of explicit about filters on the OneNote. Might have been overkill, but you're going to have to know what low-cut filters are and high-cut filters are, or low-pass or high-pass, right? You're going to see these controls all throughout all kinds of synthesizers that you're going to see. So it's important to kind of understand what they are. So for instance, what this is allowing us to do is it's allowing us to filter the sound. We're cutting out the lows, we're cutting out the highs. And so before the sound gets affected by the reverb, we can actually process it in a certain way. So we can have it so that the lows are cut out, which means that the reverb is only processing the higher frequencies in the sound, which means that the reverb might have a more shimmery kind of quality. Okay. It's a subtle thing that'll become more apparent when we adjust the size of the room. Notice how when I stop playing the track, that's when you can hear it. I'm going to stop playing. I'm going to play a little bit. I'm going to stop it. You hear all those high frequencies? Okay, now I'm gonna filter it the other way. Hear the low frequencies, right? Less shimmery, right? This is more shimmery. So you can affect the sound like that by filtering the sound before it goes into the reverb. And these knobs, they're explained on the OneNote, but you can basically graphically control this graph. You can using the knob, or you can adjust the parameters itself, right? But by now, I think you're familiar with the EQ. You've had to use it for the assignment, I think. Or maybe, or you have to do it for the next assignment. I'm losing track of our assignments.
Nakul, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I just wonder if we could hear some of these effects maybe on a dry vocal or something that might.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you could tell the difference a little bit more clearly,
Yeah.
because the sound you're using is already quite wet.
Oh sure, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. So I'm gonna take I'm gonna put a reverb on this, and let's see. Okay, so this is without.
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow.
Okay, so this is a great idea. So now I'm gonna put on this reverb, and I'm going to turn on. I'm going to filter out the low frequencies. And you hear after the sound, the lingering remains of the sound only sound like high frequencies.
Trying to figure this out.
All right. But if I filter out the high frequencies and I leave in the low frequencies,
Trying to figure this out.
right? The remaining sounds are the low frequencies, right? And so the pre-delay itself.
Trying to figure this out.
Now it's really, yeah, now you can really hear the difference. So this pre-delay right here, notice how it happens when I change this pre-delay to be really long.
Trying to figure
It's like an actual delay. You wait 1/4 of a second before you can actually hear the vocals, right? But over here, so this is what I was getting at. So if you might be in a situation where you want to hear the enunciation of trying to figure this out, but you don't want it to like be obscured by this reverb, right? If I have it really soon, the listener might be trying to figure out what I'm trying to say. But if I raise this pre-delay to, I don't know, 60 or 70, you might be able to hear it a little bit better, the initial enunciation. But as you raise the pre-delay, I think it actually there is a sensible way to set the pre-delay so it matches with the tempo of your track. I won't go into it for now, but just know that you can adjust the pre-delay, and I will talk about that eventually. So for now, I'm gonna choose a lower pre-delay. That's okay with me. So I can filter the sound before it comes into the reverb. Then what this section does right here is, just really quickly, I think just to remember if homework is, oh, okay, yeah, filter automation is for this homework assignment. Okay, great. So one thing I do want to talk about now is this idea of the spins, okay? These early reflections. We're kind of getting into a different territory by explaining what this algorithm really is. It's basically using a chorus effect to achieve this particular sound. The purpose of adding this chorus effect is to kind of create irregularities in the room, or to kind of give the sense that the room has a certain character. So I'm going to turn on the spin quality. This is with extreme amount of spin. I'm going to lower the size of the reverb, the decay time.
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about.
You see how there's a warbly quality as I raise these values higher?
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow. Trying to figure this out.
Right, so there's this idea that I explain what a chorus is, and I'll basically explain what a chorus is when we get to it, and I explained it in the OneNote right here. But basically, what's happening is, I don't think I should really get into it. I think I should just play you the sound. I do have a bunch of listening examples for what a chorus sounds like. But I think I should save this discussion for another time. just know that I guess the quick takeaway of what this particular part of this device does is it creates sort of, depending on where you push this knob, as you push it higher, it increases the intensity of the warbliness that you hear, okay? As you push it to the right, it increases the speed of the warbliness. So right now you hear a lot of warbliness and it's very fast.
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about for tomorrow.
As I move it to the left, the warbliness is a little bit slower.
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand. Now I got a lot to think about.
Okay. The idea is by creating this warbliness, you have this, you create a character for the room. You're basically like certain irregularities in the room, shape, or other factors in the room's design might actually lead to these kind of sound effects. So this algorithm includes this for your sound design satisfaction. And you could use it to kind of shape the earlier reflections, okay? You might not want to push it this high. You might want it to be a little subtle. To be honest, this whole thing is a little subtle.
Trying to figure this out, got a bit out of hand.
Right? It's all very subtle because the early reflections in general, they're the first impulses. So you can't hear them that clearly anyway. They're kind of like the very first things that inform the sound. It's more obvious when you raise the value, when you increase the intensity, right? Intensity is this direction, right? Right? Then you hear the first reflections are definitely colored by this, right? Going on, what you see is basically another chance at filtering. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to filter the sound after it's been processed by these after the early reflections. Basically all the delays, all the reflections that are the later reflections, right? You can filter those sounds. So for instance, if I just filter the high frequencies, keep in the high frequencies. There's a sheen, right? It's very similar to the earlier situation. Whereas if I filter out the high frequencies, there's a resonance, right? So basically you can adjust when you filter the sound. You can adjust you can filter the sound before the early reflections. You can filter the sounds after the early reflections. You can add in a chorus. This is basically exactly the same thing as this. You can chorus the sound after the early reflections or after the later reflections.
Trying to figure this out.
So it gives you two stages. You can basically filter before the early reflections. You can filter before the later reflections. You can chorus the early reflections, and you can chorus the later reflections, okay? Okay, I've taught you about all the parameters now that you've learned about these parameters, let me tell you about the three most important parameters. I haven't told you about the three most important parameters, okay? So I'm gonna actually lower these values to be something a little bit less intense, and I'm gonna tell you about the big three, okay? One of the big three parameters is the size. This is a huge parameter to play with. Basically, what this allows you to do is it controls the simulated size of the room. So if you set this value to be really large, it's basically, you can imagine the room is larger, and you can imagine the impact of having a large room in terms of reflections, right? The reflections might take a little bit longer to reach you. There might be a little bit more of a diffused sort of softer sound associated with it, but in general, there's a longer lingering effect as you increase the size, okay? If you lower the size, there's a shorter lingering effect. But there's also a boxier quality. This size parameter is very well related to this decay time parameter. These two knobs are very related to each other. So for instance, imagine this. imagine you have as you increase the decay time, you're increasing basically the resonance, or like the number of reflections, right? Okay. If you have a bunch of reflections in a big room,
Trying to figure this out.
you're going to have a very washed out sound. You're going to not only have a lot of places where the sound can kind of explore and navigate and bounce off and like come back to your ears later and later and later to kind of give you this large sense of later reflections, but you're also going to have all of those reflections be super, super resonant, okay? Now, if you make the decay time, if it's kind of a gauge on how resonant the room really is, if you lower the size of the room, these reflections aren't going to have any place to bounce, and the entire sound is going to sound kind of metallic.
Trying to figure this out.
Right? It sounds metallic and weird, right? It's like almost like a bathroom, right? A bathroom is a really small, okay, this is a perfect example. When I lower this size, it's like, imagine your bathroom, it's super resonant. Like everything on there is super acoustically live. Like there's just like porcelain, there's mirrors, there's all kinds of stuff that kind of creates this kind of, this glass, all this stuff kind of creates this reflective quality, but it's a small room. Doesn't it kind of sound like your bathroom, just ever so slightly? It's kind of, it has a little bit of a reverberant quality to it. If I raise the size of the room, it's no longer, your bathroom will start sounding like a cathedral. Right? So in other words, these two parameters, size and decay time, you'll have a lot of fun by toying with these two particular parameters. They're influencing the algorithm in the shape of the room and the resonance of the room, basically. The decay time what the decay time refers to actually is how long it takes for the sound to basically become inaudible or to become 60 decibels softer than its initial loudness, which basically is nothing. Like how long it takes for the sound to basically become quiet. And so this kind of has a relationship to the resonance of the room, basically. So, because if you increase this value, the reverb tail basically lingers longer. And if the tail lingers longer in a smaller room, that's going to make the room sound more resonant. I guess the resonance kind of is related to both of these parameters, but in other words, these two parameters are really, really important, okay? What I want to say, though, the third parameter that's really, really important is once you have the character of a sound that you like you might, you might like that, but then you're like, I like the character of what I've created. Now I want to actually curb it down, okay? So now we're going to talk about the third of the big three, which is the dry wet. So for instance, if I like what I heard, but it's just too much, I'm going to lower the value. Right? So now I still get the quality, the warmth of it, but it's not like, right? Now it sounds like I'm in a bathroom again. But if I lower it, I can kind of experiment with certain thresholds that sound nice. You might want to have it kind of low, like maybe. Right? You don't need something too intense, right? You can experiment with this dry wet knob right here. Another important thing to kind of know about is you can adjust the dry wet knob of the early reflections and the later reflections. So you can turn up the early reflections. You can turn up the later reflections. So early reflections, unless you do something to them by adding spin and all this stuff, is a little bit harder to hear, even if you turn it up. But the later reflections are certainly, you can definitely hear those when you raise those, right? When you raise the volume for the later reflections. So don't be intimidated. See, a lot of people, they download a preset, a reverb preset. Like I did this for years, where I was kind of afraid / lazy, and I didn't exactly know what I was doing. So I just dragged the preset on, and then I was invariably unhappy. I was like, oh man, like this is pretty good, but it's not exactly what I want. And I'd be too intimidated by this whole interface. And it wasn't until I realized that really there are only 2 values that I really have to mess with to change the sound that I probably want to get, which is the size of the room and the decay tone. The rest of it is sort of coloration. Like all of this is kind of filtering it so that I get more highs and lows, but this is really like the meat and potatoes of it, like just to affect how much reverb you're actually hearing. These 3 parameters right here are what you should mess with. It doesn't matter which DAW you're using. If you're using Logic or Ableton or Reaper, whatever you're using, you'll have parameters that are related to these on your reverb that you'll want to experiment with. So don't be intimidated by all of these controls. In fact, these are all controls that you've learned about. It's just basically one interface that kind of unifies many different parameters all at once. I want to quickly get to return tracks. On one note, if you go to sends and return tracks, there's this idea that, okay, I guess I'll preface by saying this. Any track where audio is being sent to it is a return track. So for instance, a master track is a return track because other audio is being sent into it, okay? So a master track, all the other audio from all the other tracks is being sent. You can see audio to master, audio to master, audio to master. It's a return track. It's basically where everything is returning, returned to, okay? So that a master track is a return track. There are other tracks that you can include. There are other return tracks that you can have. And for example, one return track, I guess I'll delete these return tracks and I'll create a return track from scratch. So what I'll do is I'll create a return track, insert return track. And notice how on the return track, there is a clip view and a device view. However, the clip view for a return track is useless. There's nothing you can put on a clip. There's no clips you can put on a return track. Only the device view is useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a reverb onto the device view of this return track. Remember, I want to create, insert return track. Now, what I want you to be aware of, this is something that's really cool, and it's thoroughly explained on OneNote. What's cool about having a return track is that notice also how the return tracks are separated to the right and the regular tracks are separated to the left. Now, what's amazing about a return track is that notice how there are little knobs on each of the track that say sends A, right? And notice how this little return track is called A. There's a little bit of a, there's very much a relationship between these knobs and this track. What this allows you to do, what these particular sends do, is it allows you to send parallel copies of your tracks to be processed by the return track. So for instance, if I have reverb, what I can do, I'm just going to loop a particular section so we can hear it. Okay. You know what? I'll just loop this section. You haven't heard this section anyway, so why not? Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to send. Uh-oh. I looped a section too large. Bear with me for 1 second.
Professor, would it be could you like one, just a single part, like just the synth chords or just the bass, so we can focus on just one thing?
Sure, sure. I'm actually gonna loop a section. I'm gonna turn up the sends because the idea behind a return track is you could send to multiple tracks at the same time. So I'm gonna loop a section and then I'll solo certain aspects of it to kind of show you what they sound like. So for instance, I'm gonna play a particular section. Now listen to this. I'm gonna turn up the reverb for just the synth. So if you just hear the synth, this is the synth with some reverb. I'm gonna show you on the drums actually. I'm gonna make the reverb really dramatic. Right? So what you can do is you can basically turn up on a track by track basis how much reverb you want to send to that return track. So basically I'm sending a parallel copy of this particular track to be processed by this particular return track. So what the advantage to this is I can use one reverb device and it can be distributed across all of these particular tracks. So for instance, so I could be like, oh, I want a little bit more reverb in the bass. I want a little bit of reverb in the synths. Maybe I want a lot of reverb in the drums. So what's cool about this is you can actually adjust the level of reverb for all the tracks just using this one knob. And this serves two great functions. For one, it unifies the space that you're operating under. If you have different people have different perspectives on this, but a perspective, it's funny because Andrew Huang, a YouTuber I greatly respect, who I showed you his video, thinks that you should have many different reverbs on all your different tracks. But then some other people I really respect, like Chris Warren, who has a huge reverb library, thinks that you shouldn't have many different reverbs on many different tracks because it creates this ambiguity of space. Like you're not sure if you're in a cathedral or whether you're not sure if you're in a bathroom. Like by putting a reverb on this return track, you're unifying the space that you're occupying. And that every single track that's being sent to this reverb is experiencing the same reverb. And then instead of having, reverbs are expensive, like your computer might be choking up when you're throwing these reverbs, like your CPU meter might be spiking. By using one effect on a return track, you're actually saving computer power because it's all being processed by this one return track. So just to kind of show you once again, I created a return track, right? And notice how these knobs disappeared, right? If I create a new return track, create insert return track, notice how there's knob A. What if I created another return track? Notice how now there's knob A and B. What if I created a third return track? There's A, B, and C. So what I can do is I can drag a reverb into return A, and then I can, I'll just drag like a preset, whatever, right, like that. And then what I'll do is I'll drag a grain delay, a very, very dramatic effect into return B, and I'll drag like a flanger into return C. Okay? So now the devices for all of these returns, notice how they're all separated to the side, right? A, B, and C, they each, and the device we use, each see a different device. So what I can do is for each of these tracks, I could set a number, so when I'm listening to my tracks, when I'm mixing, for instance, I'll kind of listen to all the tracks all at once, and I'll just kind of feed in a little bit at a time. This is my reverb. Maybe I'll make it a little more dramatic. see if it's working. Size is large. Okay. So what's useful about this workflow is you don't have to go into submenus. You don't have to like go, like ultimately when you're mixing your track, like you're trying to get a good level for everything going on, it's kind of a little cumbersome to go into menus and be like, oh, where's my reverb? Okay, I'm gonna turn up the reverb. Oh, where's the reverb on this track? I'm gonna go turn up the reverb. What's nice about having it in this configuration is that it's all exposed right in front of you. So you can just listen to your track all at once and you can be like, oh, I want a little bit more of this. I want a little bit more of this. Right? So there's a lot of advantages to this workflow. And of course you could solo the tracks if you want to hear them by themselves too. But personally, I do that sometimes, but a lot of times I want to listen to all the tracks together just so that I can get a sense for how they blend together. There's this rule in mixing. When you're mixing a song, you often, I don't do this all the time, but it's good to hear everything in concert. You might think you're like doing something really significant you're like, oh, I'm gonna listen to this by itself and then I'm gonna, but when you actually hear it combined with everything else, it might have the contrary effect. So it's important to hear things in context when you can as well. So I think the workflow for this kind of facilitates hearing things in context because the knobs are exposed and you can very quickly dial back things and dial things in. So that's basically the idea behind return tracks. And in a very quick nutshell, I didn't explain dry wet knobs. These have an implication on the return tracks. But I guess I can leave it there. I can talk more about the dry wet and all that stuff next time. But to leave you with this thought, experiment with return tracks and create many of them and just kind of hear how things sound when you dial certain effects in and certain effects out, and you can even automate the effects. So incidentally, I was in session view just now, but I could have done all this in arrangement view. Notice how there are 3 knobs here, 3 sliders here that correspond to A, B, and C for each particular track, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, etc. So anyway, hopefully that's useful to you. I know that's a lot of information. Don't worry, we'll talk more about it later. But if that might be enough for today. But I'll stick around for questions.
Professor?
Sure. Who wants?
Yeah. I have a question on the homework. It says one of the portions is using a example of audio you've sampled. Could we, if we recorded audio, would that count, or do we have to actually take a sample off of Ableton or off of YouTube?
That's a great question. Why is this happening? Okay, that's a great question. So basically, what I want to tell you about is on the homework itself. When you see this particular thing about audio that you sampled, I want you to be a little creative with this. You could download something from YouTube. You could chop up the sample. You can work the sample. I think in your case, you downloaded it from somewhere. I think that is appropriate. I think like what I prefer you didn't do is just literally go to the browser, go grab a sample and just drag it in and be like, oh, I did it, because that's not teaching you anything new. Like what I prefer you do is drag in something, experiment with it, maybe chop it up, slice it up. Maybe if you remember that beats mode thing we were talking about, you could basically go in and go into the clip itself and mess with these different warp modes. Do something novel with it in your explanation. It might, that, I guess, does that answer your question?
Kinda, yeah. So
I think William was asking if he could record himself and then do something to it as a kind of sampling, even though that's not really sampling.
No, yeah, I think that's totally, that is absolutely. Let me add that to, I think, like, I guess my point is that is something that's going above and beyond just dragging a sample from the browser. I think I would consider that sampling. So I would say record yourself is an example of pushing your limits. So absolutely.
And would we have to edit that too? Or like if we just added like a reverb to it? I mean, because that's what I did, and I don't think it needs more editing.
No, I think that should be enough. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem.
Professors, I have questions about the usage of musical scale. So in this case, do we require to like use the MIDI effect of the, like use the C major MIDI effect to create the musical scale, or we can just use like some music series to just play on the keyboard to play a scale?
Yeah, you could do. You're not required to use the MIDI effect. You could just play it on your keyboard. Playing it on your keyboard using MIDI effect. You could also use the music theory formula.
And do we require to use the whole scale?
What do you mean?
So like from the lower Cs to higher Cs and play each note.
No. I mean, I would say just explain how you're using the scale.
Or like we can just compose some music in C major. And
Yes. You can. Yeah. You don't have to use composing some music using a particular scale. Right. You don't have to use every single note of a scale to use the scale. You could use less notes or more. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
I had a question, Professor.
Sure.
In the last week, I bought my first external plugin, like VST, just because I found one that was on sale and I really liked the whole vibe that it was showing off. And I was wondering if you had any like recommendations for plugins.
Oh, sorry, were you asking for external interface advice or plugin advice?
I guess plugin advice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I need to add some categories on this. Like what kind of music are you trying to create?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. That's a deep question because there's so many different plugins that you could use. Yeah, I need some more context and what kind of music you'd like to create.
Sure. Yeah. The plugin that I bought is called Sketch Cassette, and it basically takes any audio and gives it like a cassette tape effect that you can adjust, like the age of the cassette and like the warble and that kind of thing. Because I primarily make like lo-fi type music, so I wanted to have that kind of like aging effect. So I found a good plugin. I was just wondering if there were any plugins that you really like.
Oh, okay. There are. Let me just look through my browser really quickly. There are too many for me to even start with. Let me actually pause my recording.